Hello, Afro fans, family. It's so good to see you. I am Reverend Dorothy Boulware. I'm the Special Projects Editor at the Afro American newspaper, afro.com. And we are face to face this morning. I have with me Alexis Taylor, our Afro Managing Editor, and we have people who were at the very first March on Washington, our guests, every one of them at different ages, different stages of life, but they were there and they're here with us this morning face to face to share some of their experiences from that day many, many years ago. And one of the important things about this is that we're about to have another March on Washington, unfortunately, for some of the same issues that we protested back then.
Hmm.
But we're going to give you some history and some information so that you can be a part of their experience and then have an experience of your own. Miss Taylor, Miss Alexis, what is it that you want to know first from our guests today?
I think you said part of it. What was their experience? And so, before we even get to the march, thank you for giving us this time today. I am so excited to have each and every one of you here. But what was life like for African Americans when this was all coming together, when the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom came together? What was the day to day life like for Black people? What were some of those experiences that spurred you into action on that day? And I will give that to anyone who wants to take that first.
Well, I'll take it, Alexis. I mean, I grew up in and was in Wilmington, North Carolina, in 1963, and it was the deep Jim Crow South. Everything was separated by race. We were fully aware of um, divisions between the races. The schools were all segregated, despite 1954 decision that should have opened them to all. And as Dorothy alluded to, we had some of the same problems that we had today. Lack of jobs or lack of well-paying jobs for Black people. I think we were still Negro then, or edging into edging
I think we were
into.
colored.
Yes,
Yeah, we might
we
have.
were
Yes,
we
you're
were
way more.
colored.
We were colored then. Yeah. So Herman can help me with this because his
Yeah,
experience and mine are um, very similar. We
yeah,
grew up in the same town, went to the same schools, and had
yeah,
the same friends, and so forth.
yeah.
Uh,
And I'll add a little bit. As Millicent said, we were truly in the segregated South. We all were. The majority of us were at Williston Senior High School, which was quote unquote the designated Black high school in Wilmington at that time. And you asked the question earlier about Emmett Till, and I would be honest with you. I don't think Emmett Till played a role in my participation in the march. What happened was that at our high school, I can't remember the person's name who organized it, but we started the beginning of the summer, and correct me if I'm wrong, Millicent, of having marches going to downtown Wilmington. We went to lunch counters, we went to the movie theater, and we had the support of the adults through the NAACP. And the issues that we primarily were dealing with was better wages, jobs, voting rights, representation, housing, and just equality across the board, which we didn't think was appropriate. But the interesting thing for me, at least in Wilmington, was that there was a collective effort among those of us who were in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Every morning we would get up, gather at Williston, and then march for about 3, 4 miles downtown and demonstrate. The other interesting thing about our group was that someone suggested that we should have black jackets. So if you look at the March on Washington, and Millicent, hold up your black jacket, Millicent, that
Oop,
we had our black
can't see it,
jackets.
Millie.
oh,
There
Yep.
you go.
We had our black jackets. And so you have about maybe on any given day during that time, maybe 60 to 100 kids, 14, 15, and 16, walking down the streets of Wilmington to deal with desegregation. And I'll share one story that one day we went to a restaurant and then they said that we wanted to order coffee and a donut. And the gentleman said, we can sell you a cup of coffee, something about 50 cents and $1 for a donut. We said no. So they called the police and there was a big arrest that day. And at that time, I was only 15. So I wasn't old enough to go to jail. I was totally disappointed that I didn't get to go before Judge Winfield Smith for him to tell me that I broke the law. I literally cried because I couldn't go to jail, if you would believe that back then. But a lot of our friends who were older, they got to go spend a night or two in jail and then go before Judge Winfield Smith. And related to the March on Washington, the older people in Wilmington rewarded us by raising funds. And I think we had 6 buses that left Wilmington and went to Washington. And I want to say 4 were adolescents and 2 were adults who were chaperones. So we had 4 buses of kids and 2 buses of adults that had the opportunity to participate in the March on Washington. And one last thing, our high school that we went to, so I graduated 65. In 1967, they closed the high school. And the rationale for closing the high school was that we didn't have a cafeteria. And so therefore, since we didn't have a cafeteria, we couldn't have a high school. However, my parents, Millicent's parents, all went to that school and there was no cafeteria, but they found that as a reason to close it in 1967. And I'll be quiet from there.
Let me just correct. It was 68.
68, I apologize.
68 that the school was closed. But on the matter of just, what was going on before the march, and we mentioned Emmett Till, and of course his death date was the way they chose the date of the march. Right. March on Washington. I don't know that he was the driving force, but he was much talked about. My mother kept the Jet magazine that showed his body. Right. He was killed when I was 14 at the time of the march. So I was younger then, but that image is still burned into my head. And even when I went to the museum in Washington, for the first couple of times, I just refused to go to that part of the exhibit about Emmett Till because it was so horrific and so deeply etched on my brain. And in terms of what was going on in Wilmington, we were, as Herman said, we were participating in demonstrations, but even longer. I mean, I remember being 12 and being in a demonstration outside the courthouse, and we were led by I think we called them commandos or I don't know, something. They were young NAACP people who we thought, or I thought, I can only speak for Millicent, I thought had some magic and wonderful power that I didn't have, and I probably would have followed those guys anywhere, but certainly to Washington. And I mean, you didn't ask this, but we went out of a sense of excitement, I think, more than anything else. I mean, as young teenagers, yes, we watched the news and were part of the news in some instances, but we weren't taking things as seriously as some other folks. So we went with a sense of excitement, but tempered by a sense of dread because we had no idea, what we would find at the end of that bus ride.
Wow.
And it was a time for us to socialize with our friends, 14, 15, and 16. You get to hang out with your friends all day and not have just marching and carrying signs and having a good time.
Okay, hold on. We'll get to the march. We'll get to the march part. But thank you so much, Ms. Fauntleroy and Dr. DeBose, for that answer. Ms. Reed, thank you for
Yes.
joining us. Mr. Cox, I see you hopped on with us for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
Mr. Cox, the question was, what what were the things that were going on day to day, leading up to the march that sparked your interest and made you really understand how necessary that action was. What was life like for African Americans in the years and the decades around that time? What was happening? What was brewing? What were you feeling in those years? What were your experiences that spurred you into action? And so, Miss Reed, I know you have.
I grew up in a very different environment. I grew up in New York City,
Oh, okay. Tell us what was
and
happening.
we were not faced with black and white. It was an environment that was culturally diverse, it was racially diverse, it was, you don't call anybody a name because you might get the wrong culture involved in it and get in trouble. But my mother was very much a peacenik as well
Mm,
as a civil rights advocate. She is from the South, but living in New York, we didn't feel the day to day that Millicent and Herman felt. We didn't have the separation of schools. We were integrated into schools
mm,
always, starting when I was in the fourth grade. But usually I was like one of only the only black one in the class. But it wasn't an integration thing. It was something to do with test scores and all sorts of other things that New York was doing special programs for education. And I grew up in the projects. So we were very much involved in the neighborhood and in the church that we went to. I was a Presbyterian, and our minister was very much involved with what was going on in the world. And there were student ministers who would come to the church, and some of them were the bus riders that went down to
mm,
Mississippi and came back, thank God. But he was always focused on what was going on in the world. And being a church member and being part of that community, we were always involved in what was going on. And to us, going to the March on Washington was a field trip. Like Herman was saying, we were young. I was 13, 14 years old. I was getting on a bus and we were going to Washington, D.C. There was nothing else to that. But once I got there and realized how many people were gathered for one movement, for one purpose, it was almost overwhelming. It was the most cordial group of people that I had been around in a crowd. They were dressed as most black men were dressed then, in black pants, white shirts, and a black tie. It was peaceful, it was gregarious, it was purposeful. There, it was just a very moving experience. And the saddest part of my recollection of that time was that years and years later, my father had died, and my mother was showing us slides of, their life earlier and growing up, and we were just having a slideshow. And my mother was sitting on a bench, and she looked really pissed off. And my father was sitting next to her. And I said, "Why are you looking so dour?" She said, "Because he told me I couldn't go to the March on Washington." And in my recollection, I had no memory that my mother did not go. And I felt so bad for her. So when Obama got elected, I went to Washington for my mother. But that's my recollection of the March on Washington. Was just overwhelmingly beautiful. Hearing Marian Anderson sing, hearing the speeches that, of course, you don't remember when you're 14 years old, but to hear them later and know that you were there and try to find yourself on the big pictures of where you were standing, it's quite a remarkable part of my history.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing.
Amazing.
I do have a follow-up question. Do you mind sharing your mother's name and where she was from?
My mother was Rosalie Harris, and she was from Abbeville, South Carolina.
I love it. Okay. I grew up in Columbia. And
Aha! A lot
so,
of my people from Greenville and Anderson.
yes,
Yeah,
I love it. And so, do you think that your mother's experiences played a part in how she saw the March on Washington and the need for it, and how she joined a church that kept you all involved and aware?
very much so.
Okay.
She was totally involved in what was going on in the world and had a stance for it and had room in our home in the projects for people coming through town who were marching, who were um, at the church, who needed housing for the time that they were in New York. Our house was always, there was something going. Somebody, oh, who's on the couch today? It was quite an exciting growing up, and my mother was involved in so many things and gave me the courage to be opinionated and to take a stand and to stand up for what I believed in. And I credit her for that.
That's
Well, thank you so
amazing.
much for that. Rev, I will hand it over to you.
I want to hear from Mr. Cox because I think I remember him telling me he was a part of the organizers for the
Right,
march. So
right.
I want to hear his unique perspective on all of that.
All right. Oh, thank you very much. Before I begin, Jim Hawkless sends his apologies. He's fell ill and is not able to be here today. I just want to, I guess, if I start before the how I got involved in 1960, I started with the sit-ins. And I'm a student at Howard University, and both participated in the sit-ins up and down Route 40, going from New York to Washington D.C. on the eastern shore of Maryland, and also was involved in picketing trailways and Greyhound because of the freedom rides and the burning of the buses and the brutality that people faced when they were on the freedom rides. I as a student, I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so therefore, from 1960 probably until 1967, I was involved in much of the work of the civil rights movement. The March on Washington, I was in Mississippi in 1963 with voter registration, as many SNCC people were in Mississippi. And really, most people who were involved in Mississippi in voter registration didn't really think that the march, they should interrupt what they were doing to come to the march. I knew Bayard Rustin because I met him in a debate when he debated Malcolm X in 1961 at Howard University on the question of separation versus integration. And we continued our relationship, and because he was kind of a mentor to a number of us and people at Howard, including Stokely Carmichael and Ed Brown and Cleve Sellers and a number of other people. And so when the march came up, and you remember the march was organized in only 8 weeks. When the march came up, about 10 weeks before the march, Bide called me up and said, look, SNCC has to be involved in the March on Washington because it's going to be important. And so I, listening to Bide with a great deal of respect and also had a great deal of respect for Randolph, I convinced the people in and SNCC, particularly James Foreman, to participate, that SNCC should participate in the march. James Foreman's position was, if you think it was important, then you go represent SNCC at the March on Washington. So, in fact, I was one of the people who all helped organize the March on Washington. I mean, I think that, for me, the big issue was John's speech. And as some of you might remember, John had to change his speech during the March on Washington because the Kennedy administration objected to it. And the objection was this: SNCC felt that the legislation that was being put forth, the civil rights legislation that was being put forth, was not sufficient. It did not deal with the issue of voter registration. It didn't deal with the issue of housing. It didn't deal with a whole lot of things, and that we felt it was not sufficient. I passed John's speech out on August 27th, the night before, and the Kennedy administration people saw it and wanted John to change his speech because it criticized the Kennedy administration uh, for not doing enough. We actually, when Bayard Rustin and then A. Philip Randolph came to John Lewis, and myself about changing the speech, when Bayard came, we told him we weren't going to change it. When Randolph came to us, because Randolph, I believe, was about 77, John was about 23 years, I was 22 years old. Given the respect we had for him, we made the changes to John's speech. And the big issue was this: we felt that we had to take a much more comprehensive view about what it took to deal with the issues of Black people, particularly on the issue of power and registration, voter registration, holding political office, and all that. And that we felt that should be the focus. Others and the civil rights movement, particularly Roy Wilkins and Whitney Young, felt that at the end of the day, the legislation should be the civil rights legislation, the Kennedy administration should be the focus. So, I mean, that there was a tension, about that. And so what we did, I spent, when 250,000 people out there, John Lewis, myself, and James Foreman were at the back of the Lincoln Memorial and changing John's speech. We made the adjustment to not say it was irrelevant, but we said it needed work and it needed help. So my sense about the March in Washington, I mean, as everybody has said, it was a very big deal because that was the first time the Black community spoke to the nation in such large number, and then people began to feel their strength and their power. Because one of the things that everybody has to realize is that march was organized in 8 weeks. And if the Black community was not ready to say they were sick and tired of being sick and tired of racial and economic exploitation, we could not have done it. Mm-hmm. So really, when you look at why the march was such a success, it was the state of the Black community and its need to be able to say to America that enough is enough. Particularly, and I really have to lift up the veterans, the Black veterans of World War II, who said, and they began by saying, if we're going to fight for freedom overseas, we need to fight for freedom here. It was called the Double V. So by the time, and they started in 1945. So by the time we got to 1963, you had a coalition and understanding of we need to do something. And I think the March on Washington was the place that those people who came out of World War II, people, some of them who, Medgar Evers, who got shot that year, Amzie Moore, all these people who had been organizing all this time, a lot through the NAACP, that it was the energy that started in 1945 that made the March on Washington such a success.
Mr. Cox, where can I buy your book?
I tell you what, though, I would say that for those who want to understand, you should go to the SNCClegacyproject.org, and we are featuring the March on Washington this month. I mean, this week. And if you go there, you'll see not only my remembrance, but you'll see the remembrance of a number of people from SNCC. And then you can stroll through the whole, we call it the digital movement platform, to get a good sense of what, has happened and what was done, before the March on Washington and after. So I would encourage everybody to go to snicklegacy.org.
Ms. Taylor,
Yeah.
could you put that link up if you don't mind?
We can get it up 1 second, Miss Dana.
So let's stay with the march. Tell me something else about something that impressed you, or something that disappointed you, or something that surprised you from the speeches or the gathering itself. Anybody, just
The
jump in with that.
gathering. The gathering, I had never seen so many diverse Black people in one
Mm,
place for one purpose. It was amazing to feel the energy of the community coming together. There was always talk of whether you are nonviolent or you are of the FOI, you need to stand up, and or the Black Panthers. There was always that debate going on. But to
Hmm.
see everybody, so many different kinds of people, Black people, white people, all kinds of people
mhm,
come together for that purpose was invigorating. And I'm sure it spawned a lot of us as teenagers. So when we got to colleges and high schools, we continued the fight
Hmm.
and continued it all through our lives because
mm.
of the energy that was instilled in us at that march.
Mr.
I was,
DeBose.
go ahead.
The interesting thing for me, and this is a little selfish, that we in Wilmington had these black jackets. And so as we were walking through the crowd, we could always distinguish ourselves. And if we got lost, we could find ourselves because of our black jackets. Interesting thing, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya in a place called Kisumu, and I went into a bookstore, and there was a history of African Americans in America. And one of the pictures were a couple of guys from Wilmington, from Jervey Projects, who had on the black jackets. And there they were in this book in Kisumu, Kenya.
If
So
I,
those
if
black,
I may,
those black, say that again.
I was just going to add to what you were saying. Go on. I'll
Yeah,
do it.
those black jackets just, at least in my mind, made us stand out and just appreciated the support that we got from the adults in Wilmington to help us buy those black jackets, because I don't know how much they cost, but they were
It
expensive.
was
And
more
so
than what we had.
yes. And I just know I begged my parents so much to help me get a black jacket, especially before we went to Washington. But I would just accent what Ms. Reed said, was that to see roughly that many of black people in one place, and no fights and no drinking, and people just in good fellowship and having a good time and feeling uplifted from the whole presentation. As a 15 and 16-year-old, it just made my day. And I think it had a tremendous impact, as Ms. Reed said, as to what I have done with the rest of my life.
Hmm.
I certainly endorse, affirm whatever you said. I wanted to show you all this book. I don't know whether you can see. It's called "This Is the Day: The March on
Yeah.
Washington." It's by Leonard Freed, and it's his a photographic account of the March on Washington, and on one of the commemorative ones. I think it was the 50th one also. But the reason I point out the book is that our black jackets in our group are featured throughout this book, and again, it made it easy. If he just followed us, then he'd have, an account of what the day was like. But you ask also about disappointments. We were all invigorated by the speeches and by the music and, the performances and all, and by the hope that came from that day.
Yeah.
But on the way back to Wilmington on those same buses, police stopped one of our buses. Now that was, we did again. We had the same kind of fear that actually that we lived with day to day, but it was just heightened because we had just come from this group where everybody, white people, all people were accepting and receptive to one another. And they, again, some drummed up charge that I can't now remember what they said was wrong. But anyway, they stopped the bus. And then there was the question of whether the other buses would stick around or should they just go save themselves, so to speak, and leave that one group of people to fend for themselves. But it was a damper. It was a disheartening moment in what had been a thrilling day for us.
Mr. Cox, you were going to
Yeah,
say
there are three things that come to mind. About 7 o'clock in the morning, Bayard Rustin and myself went out to the mall, and there was literally nobody there. And so Bayard says to me, "Do you think anybody's coming to this march?" And soon as he said that, there was a group of youth from NAACP coming from Virginia. The big problem was that the roads were clogged. There were so many buses and people trying to come to Washington at the same time. It was hard for people to get in. So that was the first memory. The second memory is I was up on the stage up there, and I saw Harry Belafonte bring in, every movie star, Marlon Brando, Charleston Heston, any movie star, James Baldwin was there. All of those people were there. And, at 22 years old, these are the people you watched in the movies. And so they were tremendous amount of, I was, just kind of starstruck. And then I think the third thing is I was close enough to hear Mahalia Jackson. And it was kind of call and response as King was speaking. It was like, you were in the church. In front of 250,000 people, you heard the call and response. So, those three things stick out. Bayard asking whether, in fact, anybody would come. Second is, all that star power that Harry Belafonte brought, and the relationship and the back and forth church that was with Martin King and Mahalia Jackson.
how did you guys orchestrate all of that without having cell phones and the internet and all that kind of stuff?
We managed well.
Yeah. Yes. Well,
Alexis,
you asked about disappointments. I'm sure I did not think of it on the grounds, but given this moment and these times, then I have to go back and say that I am disappointed that women did not play a more prominent role in the day's events.
I was waiting for that.
And women were there, but were not allowed to speak. In some instances, they had their names on chairs and so forth, and somebody, quietly moved the chairs away. And women were and are the backbone in every other bone protest in this country. And I think it is a glaring and awful mistake that they did not have a more public role in the March on Washington.
Yeah, and I think that's clearly correct. And I think it started and given the kind of mindset that occurred, was there. It seems to me, at least, the sponsoring groups, you had, civil rights organization, labor organizations, and unions and so forth, and they're all headed by men. But people like Dorothy Height from the United Council, United Negro Women's Council, they were Anna Hedgeman, Dr. Anna Hedgeman. They were all people who were there and capable. But I, given the environment, and I'm sitting in there, and it took not only, it's interesting, it took a lot of energy. First of all, women were not involved, but it took tremendous amount of energy for young people to be involved. If we were not doing what we were doing in Mississippi and the freedom rides and cities and so forth, in fact, there would have been no young people involved in the March on Washington. So my sense is that, I think probably the regret of the old school thinking that, that was male dominated, is probably, an issue that was the other issue that, it's that, and it's going to come out. There's a movie coming out on Bayard Rustin on Netflix in the fall. I mean, Bayard Rustin was gay, and there was a great deal of hostility to him from certain people. So, I mean, I think the issue of women, I think, the broader discussion of young people, and, and the question of allowing a diverse, leadership there. I must say that, that probably, I mean, those things occurred, and, I would say, yes, they're disappointments looking at it from the perspective of today.
And I'll jump in here and say that in our coverage of the anniversary of the march, we did look back at the role of women in the original march. And we had Helen Bazune, who is an amazing Afro freelancer, write a piece. And the title of that is Moving to the Foreground, a look at Black women in the March on Washington. That is up on our website. She does touch on how Dr. Dorothy Height was really, really crucial in pulling together the women volunteers for a variety of different roles, promoting the rally, contributing to just the sheer amount of attendees there that were present on that day. So absolutely check that out. It's on afro.com. Helen Bazune wrote that piece, and it came out August 16th. So thank you for bringing that up and circling back to that topic. I do have a question. I have two questions. I have one that's to everyone about the March on Washington and the role of youth. What I hear everyone on the call saying is that even prior to the March on Washington, you all were involved in your own communities in your own way. And so I look at youth today. We absolutely have that capability. We have capable youth who are already leading. We have a story about the NAACP youth chapter that's out in Baltimore County right now. So we know that youth are, like-minded. They have civil rights, human rights on their minds. What youth today who are 13, who are 14, who are 15, preparing to go to this anniversary 60 years later?
Well, I think we have to tell the youth and everybody else to hold on to hope. Because again, we've said multiple times that in many cases we are fighting the same fight.
Same thing.
And so we should never think, okay, our mission is done. Because it's not. Because even when we gain rights, we have to fight to hold on to them. As you know, in this time we're living now, we're losing all kinds of rights that we thought, were, settled law. And so I would just encourage young people to, as I say, stay the course, but also to make their voices heard. And it's, of course, that is in large part the responsibility of those of us who are older, is to, open the gates, allow younger people to have a say, because let's just face it, I mean, they have more ahead than we do. And so they want to make life better for themselves and for those that follow them. So, there's a place for all of us, because there is much work to be done. But let the people with the young minds do some of this, because first, they're more creative in many instances. I'm not going to make a blanket statement about it all, but they're more creative. They have more time on their hands. In one respect, actually, retirees probably have more time. But in any case, they have new ideas. We cannot keep churning up the same old stuff. We can't use the tactics of the 60s to deal with what we face in 2023. Let's open up and let them be, all they can be in the fullness of their intelligence and their beauty and their understanding of history. Yeah.
I will add to what Millicent said, and I'll quote my fellow alumni from North Carolina A&T sent someone through Howard in there. I will throw A&T in there and say Aggie Pride. But as Jesse Jackson always says, keep hope alive. That in these trying times, you look at the state of Florida, you look at the state of Arkansas, and it was just did my heart well to see that some of the individuals in the state of Arkansas are fighting back against the governor, who is saying that if you take the AP African American history class, you won't get credit towards graduation. And families and friends have said, well, we're going to take this course anyway, because it's important that we know the history of what Black folk have contributed to this country. And I think in this day and time, with the election coming up and all the issues that some people have raised, as Millicent said, it looked like we're trying to go backwards rather than forward. Mm-hmm. And I would just say to young people, I don't have a definite answer on how to continue the struggle, but I would just say, keep hope alive, as Jesse said, figure out a way that you can make a contribution. I think we were fortunate in Wilmington that we had people who supported the march. And as Mr. Cox said, that young people played a big role, the older people in Wilmington. And I don't want to forget the churches. Reverend J.P. Dickerson, his First Baptist Church, was one of the persons who helped us organize in Wilmington. And so I would just say that, figure out what works best for your particular community, and then figure out a way how to network with others across the country and figure out where do we go from here. But as Jesse would say, keep hope alive.
And I'd like to say people, also,
go ahead. I would encourage young people.
I'll stand down. Go ahead and speak.
I would encourage young people to pay attention, because they're missing some basic things that the government is doing right now. And they're kind of like, well, that's yes, every little thing, every school board, everything matters, because it contributes to the whole nonsense that is overcoming our society. And they need to pay attention to and demand the things that they know they need. They need these classes in their educational process. Mm-hmm. They need to know the entire history of America, not just the selected history as told by those who wrote those books. But sometimes they don't believe that one little individual can make a difference. And it does happen that one person can make a difference. And that one person adds to two other people who are making a difference, and differences can be made, but they've got to start paying attention.
And I just like to say that young people and old people also should remember that, you don't have to act on a world stage. You can be what you can be in your little corner of the world. Believe me, there's something to be done there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. What I have learned in my older age is that presence counts. I can't do much, in terms of actually organizing, but if somebody calls, I'm going to be there, because that's what I can give. I can stand with the crowd, and so can you. But also just do what little bit you can do to change the world in your little corner of it. You don't have to have an international podium, but just in your community, because those are the problems that you know best anyway. That's where your expertise has most value, with what you know. So go for it.
So in 1960, we were mostly between 17 and 21 years old. And we had the good fortune to have Miss Ella Baker as our leader. And actually, as part of the sit-ins, Ella Baker got $800 from Martin Luther King to hold a meeting of students together. And the one thing that Ella Baker said, she was the executive director for SCLC. She said to us as 17 and 18 and 19-year-old people, Do not become the youth group of the SLC. Find your own energy, find your own direction, find where you needed to go. And I think the other thing that she gave us that was really important is that she pointed out that we who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Mhm.
And what has happened over the last 75, last 80 years, we have changed America. And the people who came to the SNCC conference, they were mainly from HBCUs. And I must say Howard was part of the leadership. I didn't want to get that in. Uh, but I must, I think that what we have, we have to realize, for those of us who knew, I mean, I was 14 years old when Emmett Till got killed, and I knew America then and I know it now. I mean, and what we have with the MAGA people is trying to take us back, but we succeeded. Now, I spend a lot of time talking to young people. In fact, we have a meeting starting on September 6th, that goes to the 10th, and we have everybody from BYP 100, Dream Defenders, Organizing While Black, and what we can bring as people who have had experience is to understand clearly the what and we should be doing and why we should be doing it. How we should go about making it happen is really the responsibility of the young people. And so my sense is that, I try to every chance I get to be in a place to do those things that they asked of us. And you will be highly surprised to know there are a lot of them who are very eager to learn and say, what can we do together? And I think, at particular at this time, what we face in America is which view of the world will prevail.
Hmm.
Will we have a diverse America, or will we have one that's based on white supremacy? And we have to frame the discussion as a battle that that's been going on since America was founded. We made the change over the last 75 years, because before that, America was always about white supremacy. We have now put diversity on the table, which not only includes people of color, but women, people with LGBTQ
GBTQ.
communities, all of those things. And the question is, which view of America will sustain going forward? So my sense is when I talk to them, and as I will on September 6th, that is going to be the problem. And one of the things I found is interesting, a young lady who organized in the New Georgia Project, for in fact, with executive director, she said, when I look at the situation, I don't view it as midnight, as dark. I view it as 3 a.m. in the morning, that we are now moving in a direction that gets us
Hmm.
where we need to be. Our responsibility now is to how do we get from 3 a.m. in the morning to 5 a.m. in the morning, because at some point we know there'll be the sun will rise. And
Sunrise.
that is the fight that we have at this point.
Mr. Cox, could you tell us about this meeting on September 6th as to where it's going to be and what it's about?
Basically, the I'm the chairperson of the SNCC Legacy Project. And that is a group of us who, I guess the youngest one is 75 years old. Hey,
Aren't we all?
so, and basically we have put together, and that's why I mentioned earlier the SNCC Legacy Project website, so that what we knew is we had to make sure that our history was maintained, and we had to collect it and interpret it, and we tell the stories from the bottom up and from the inside out. So we value people who were sharecroppers. We value people who cleaned the houses. We value people who were there. And what's interesting, so that's the bottom up. When I say the bottom up, inside out means those who took the actions are telling the stories. Because if you don't do that, as the African American newspaper knows, that at the end of the day, others will tell stories about you and you will disappear from
Hmm.
history. So that's the first thing. And so as part of that conversation, we're doing two things. First, this meeting is going to be at Duke University, but it's going to be about 35 to 40 people. I mean, because we wanted to talk to the organizers who are going to do things. So that's the first thing. So and this is I mean, we did one in Highland in February. So we keep doing it. We keep doing it because, we know that, our shelf life is,
Short.
5, 10 years, and that's it. So I mean, so that we know that, and I tell people the only way those of us who are of a certain age can succeed, and the ancestor can succeed, is if they succeed, because that is the reality. They're our reality going forward, just as we are the reality of our forefathers. So that's the first thing we're doing.
We lost you.
Yeah, we lost
Oh,
your sound.
We
We
lost
can
you.
hear
we
you.
can't hear you, Mr. Cox.
Yeah, his sound is gone. Um, yeah. We can get the information though on the website, the SNCC Legacy Project website, and I'm sure
Okay.
all the details for the meeting are there. We are in our
Okay.
winding down time now. It has been amazing to spend this time with you and have you take us back to the original March on Washington. I should say, in my house, everything was about church, so we saw it from a distance, but it's great to hear from people who have been there, and with the purpose of hoping that some fires will be lit and some interest will be sparked, and we will energize some younger people to take it up and be present at this upcoming march. Anybody have a last word they just got to get out before we go?
Well, I
Just
would
what?
like to say something.
Go
And,
ahead,
and
Millicent.
and this is, maybe a downer, so to speak, but I think it behooves us to be aware of our enemies, and I mean, or not. I wouldn't say enemies. I grew up as a Christian, so, but people with with other ideas, even the march itself. At the time, Malcolm X was very much opposed to the March on Washington, and I just cite him as one person, but there were several other people. But in their disagreement, I think there was still something to be learned, and some of the things that he was objecting to ended up, being part of the march. They were not there at the beginning, but I mean, throughout history, wherever we are, there are going to be people and organizations opposed to whatever is being attempted.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, hear them out. At the very least, you want to know what it is your enemies are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And you may, in fact, become more understanding and want to incorporate some of what their objections are.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go through life not thinking that we know everything, because
Exactly.
no one person has a monopoly on ideas or intelligence.
Miss Bullworth, if I may ask, we have had a great conversation. And as I used to say to my students, if it's not written, it didn't occur. What happens to this information that I'm just so impressed with Mr. Cox that has been shared? I know you probably have taken this, but will your editor there write up a piece as to what was discussed here and where does this go next? I mean, do we just do this today and say, okay, that's it? Or are there other plans that you and your staff have for something of this nature?
Well, there definitely will be somebody writing about what's happening today. This will be played for everybody who goes to hear it. And I want you to know that Miss Patricia Green, one of your classmates from school, is on here cheering you on while you're talking. But yeah, the Afro's job is to tell the story, and so what you have done today is to help us tell the story. And it is a story that will continue to be told in print and online. And I'm going to let the editor speak for herself as she closes us out this morning.
Yes, Dr. DeBose, we will have print coverage of the conversation. There were so many topics addressed, so many different ideas shared. I think that outside of this being a live stream that has information and experiences on record, outside of the print article that will come out of this, we also now have information about upcoming events that people can join. We have information about different organizations that are still doing the work here today. So people, please check out the websites. I believe Miss Dana Peck put them into the chat, but they also came up on the screen about the SNCC Legacy Project. Go to those different organizations, see where you fit in. But there's also been a lot of great advice about how to contribute in your own way, in your own small corner of the world. So absolutely, thank you, Ms. Smith. Share this live
Mhm.
stream today because the conversation matters. The
Mm.
conversation spurs the action, and that is why I'm so appreciative of you all being here today. This was a very needed and necessary conversation, and I'm looking forward to our coverage. We will have people not only in Washington, D.C., those credentials are rolling in. We'll have photographers there. I'll be there on the ground. The actual March portion of it will be taking place between 1 and 3 p.m. But we'll be there on the ground early in the day, not only to capture the different speeches and the different parts that'll be happening on the stage, but doing the same thing that we did 60 years ago, which is down to the attire that people wore to the march, covering the role of women. We have someone, Helen Bazune, the same freelancer who wrote the story about women moving to the forefront of this civil and human rights fight. She's going to be there specifically looking to speak with women, looking to speak with mothers who have brung their children out, looking to speak with just any type of issue or any detail related to women who are out that day. Helen Bazune will be on the ground. We'll have Daquan Lawrence on the ground. He is one of our international writers who does a lot of coverage for in different policies and things happening internationally. He'll be there specifically looking for the presence of Black men. What are some issues at the forefront facing Black men? So the same way that we had multiple writers and photographers out 60 years ago, we'll have multiple people there, as well as in Annapolis, where there will be a commemoration event happening as well.
Okay. And then one last word to Mr. Cox, that you have an amazing story, and I hope that you will find time to write a piece for the Afro or somebody, because once you leave, that information is gone. And I was just so impressed with what you shared with us today. So I hope you will find some time in your spare time to put that on paper or somewhere.
Yeah, I can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, what I did write my remembrance, and if someone will send me an email, I'll mail the remembrance to you, to the Afro American, and so that if you want to share it, that'll be great.
Absolutely. And we welcome commentary from you all, whether it's March on Washington related or if there's something on your mind. We welcome your commentary.
Thank you. It's
Okay.
been fantastic.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much to Millicent for helping us get this started. Thank you for everyone who has shown up. Have a wonderful day and continue to spread the love and the hope
Yes.
so that we can keep moving forward. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
Good to see you all.